So now we look in more depth at Plato's metaphysics. Central to Plato's metaphysics are, of course, the forms. So these forms, for Plato, are the true objects of knowledge. This is what you know. You can have beliefs about this physical world, but knowledge is about the forms. And because of the requirements laid down in his epistemology, his theory of knowledge, these forms must be real, they must be objective, they must be independent and unchanging. So where and when are they? And the answer is that they're pretty weird because they're not spatial temporal entities. They don't exist in space. And perhaps they don't exist in time. Now, this conception of putting the forms outside of the spatial temporal reality has led to all kinds of problems raised by Plato himself and others contemporary to him, and of course ever since, regarding how such entities can interact with the world of particulars and of course the soul, because in the Meno, when you die, according to Plato, your soul goes and hangs out with the forms, which seems to require time. Now, there are all kinds of workarounds you can do in metaphysics. The idea of, places that are not three-dimensional space is kind of odd, but there are arguments for such dimensions or planes. The idea of being outside of time is more problematic, but workarounds to that too. Now, Plato is, in presenting these forms, in addition to dealing with the problems in epistemology, he's also addressing the classic paradox of change. And we saw this previously when we're looking at various other pre-Socratic philosophers. And the paradox of change is this. To change, a thing has a need to remain the same. If it didn't remain the same, it would be destroyed rather than change. So the paradox essentially is change requires a lack of change. Now, our good dead friend Heraclitus, the fire guy, he took change to be the ultimate reality. Permanence was a mere illusion, because the world is, metaphorically, and for him, really, fire. In such a world, knowledge, the way Plato defines it, would not be possible, because there'd be nothing permanent to know. Now, our good dead friend Parmenides, also pre-Socratic, he took the opposite view of Heraclitus, that reality doesn't change, and change is the illusion. Now, of course, the problem with Parmenides' view is a problem of intuition, which is that intuitively, change seems to be a thing that happens, because even as some later philosophers argued, even if there is an illusion of change, the illusion still seems to involve change. So Plato's approach was a compromise, essentially. He saw them both being partially right, and also, of course, partially wrong. And so what was his solution? Well, his solution essentially is a compromise between the two views of reality. And so he accepts a form of metaphysical dualism. You have, on one hand, the particulars. This is the world that we live in, the world of Kiwis, but the bird, the fruit, also the New Zealanders, roast beef sandwiches, cars, stars, etc. And these particulars, these individuals, are imperfect. They're in constant change, and under Plato's epistemology, they're only the objects of mere opinion. They can't be known, in a strict sense of the term. Again, in everyday conversation, people say, I know this and I know that, and what they really mean is they believe it, this, or they believe that. So the particulars would correspond to Heraclitus's, constantly changing world. But Plato also, of course, has the forms. They're unchanging, they're perfect, and in his epistemology, can be known. So they correspond to Parmenides' view, an unchanging, eternal world. So what about the world of particulars, the world we live in when we're alive. Plato takes the view that reality comes in degrees. Now, we normally, intuitively, think of reality as being, binary. Something is real, that is, say it exists, or it doesn't. But Plato, many, medieval thinkers and beyond, took the view that there are degrees of reality. One way to think of it by analogy, using, games like video games and tabletop role-playing games, is that when you create a character in games that have levels, like Warcraft or Dungeons & Dragons, you start off at first level, so your character is really weak. And then by mostly committing murder and theft, you become more powerful by getting experience points and leveling up. And you can kind of think of it like having levels. So it's, your character at first level is real, but as you gain more power, you could say you become more real, more powerful. So one way to think of it is the reality is like levels of power. And so the forms would be the realest of all. They would be, the most perfect, the most powerful, and then, lesser things would have lesser reality. Now, this notion of degrees of reality will be a common one throughout the history of metaphysics, and we'll see examples of it with our good dead friend Aquinas especially. So the world of particulars is a world of degrees, and the forms have a role in this. Namely, for Plato, the forms are the cause of the particular things. So all of us being human, if there's a form human, the form human is the cause of us being humans. Similarly, to the degree that people are beautiful, the form of beauty is the cause of their beauty. Now, he brings up, of course, lots of metaphors for how this works. The particulars resemble the forms. So we would be like the form of human. To the degree that we are beautiful, we would resemble the form of beauty. To the degree that there is justice, say in the treatment of a person, it would resemble the form of justice. He also uses the metaphor of participation, whatever that might mean. And so he often talks about how the particulars participate in the forms in varying degrees. So kind of metaphorically, we like uplink to them somehow. And I guess to use an analogy to like Wi-Fi, I guess we get varying degrees of signal strength. So we get, more or less of the form in terms of, in us. So someone who's very beautiful would participate in the form of beauty in a greater degree. To use the metaphor, not Plato's of course, because predates Wi-Fi by a long time, that they would have a really strong, strong signal. If someone is less beautiful, you see them as having like a weaker connection. This is all metaphorical, and critics, as we'll see in the future, ask, what does this mean? What is it to, participate in the forms? The forms also group particulars, individuals, tokens, into types, categories, making them intelligible, organizing them. Now, Plato also, in addition to, his discussion of the forms, he goes on to talk about his famous line in Allegory of the Cave, and we'll turn to discussing that next. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.